Hello, everyone, and welcome to Schmidt List Live. I am your host, Kurt Schmidt, president and partner at Foundry, and today's show is meant to inspire and educate leaders like yourself. So I'm very excited for today's show because I've got my good friend Ben here, and we're going to be talking about all things leadership development and how do we measure leadership development? How do we measure leadership? Isn't it that impossible? So many people go through leadership development programs or consider them, but they don't really think about what's on the other side of that and how do they know that it had an impact. So we're going to be talking about all of those things today. But if you have questions or comments during the show, go ahead and post them. The comments are open and live waiting for you. So join us and we're going to have a lot of fun. So let's jump in and talk with Ben here and just Ben, how are you today? It is so good to see you. How is Canada treating you?
Hey, Kurt, doing really well. Thanks for having me on again. Canada is treating me well. Of course, this time when we're recording, it's beautiful, blue skies outside. I think the last time we might have chatted might have been in the middle of winter when you don't want to come visit Canada very often. But Hey, this is a good time to talk about Canada.
Yeah, no, well, Minnesota is not far off. It's pretty much the same climate.
That's true.
So
That's true.
I'm right there with you. So tell me about Cantera Leadership. This is your company. What is the work you do and who do you do it for?
Yeah, so short version, I use a strengths-based approach to help transform leaders, teams, and organizations in a way that helps track and measure growth. And I do this, one of my main targets is companies within the tech sector, although for anyone watching this, of course, you know that leadership is a universal principle and team development is a universal thing as well. So I end up working with a lot of companies outside of tech as well, helping just to maximize their impact in regards to how they invest in their teams, build their culture, things like employee engagement, things like leadership development. How do you build your leaders? I do a lot of coaching, but also a lot of workshops and leadership accelerators. And I have a bunch of programs that I do to help organizations with all of that.
Awesome. Well, Ben, thank you so much again for joining me today. I'm really excited to learn from you today because this is an area that I have struggled with. I've been through these sorts of leadership development programs in the past at companies I've worked for. And usually it's about slapping kind of an OKR on the tail end of some sort of goal that we come up with. And that's how we track things. Is it that simple? Really? Can we just cut the show short here, Ben, and say, come up with an OKR, slap it on the tail end of it, and then call it a day?
That would be the shortest Schmidt List episode ever, I think, probably, right? I wish it was as simple as that. Although if it was as simple as that, maybe I wouldn't be doing the work that I'm doing because then it'd be too easy for organizations. And, I'm not trying to say that organizations can't do it alone. I think there's a lot of key things that organizations can do, but, it doesn't usually work that way. And I was looking at some numbers before getting on this recording just to kind of prep myself a little bit. $358 billion spent on corporate training last year.
Wow.
Worldwide. 41 billion in the US alone around leadership training. And a lot of that is not measured, tracked. And really, that's not even the key thing, measured or tracked. A lot of it isn't tied into business objectives.
Right.
And I think that's really where the tension lies, because a lot of learning and development that happens within organizations, whether it's leadership development or pick any learning and development initiative, it's kind of like there's this tension between the people in charge of learning and development, because they wanted to see this program have great content and, people enjoy it. And, that's kind of what they want to try to target. And that's nothing wrong with that, because we do want to have great content. We want to have people that enjoy the training and enjoy learning. But then you have the leadership in the organization that is trying to say, well, how we want business objectives. We want to hit our strategic initiatives. And that tension between those two groups often ends up meaning that the organizations view that investment not as an investment, just as an expense, which is a difference.
Sure.
We don't want it to be an expense. We want it to be an investment.
Yeah. Well, and I love how you put that, Ben, because I think it's key that the company needs to do some work before they just pull the trigger on this. They need to do some internal soul searching a bit ahead of time. And one of the things that I would very much suggest is know why you're doing it, right? Because there's a couple of reasons I've seen people do this sort of thing. One is, well, yes, the company is not doing as well as it could, and the team needs to have better performance at the leadership level. The other is, I'm really passive aggressive and I don't want to fire some of these people that I don't like. So I need an outside person to come in and give me some stats so I can blame that and not on my bad leadership as managing them as a team. That's just something I've experienced. I don't know if you have, but can we talk about that for a second, about how I need to know if leadership development is the right thing to do, or do I need a new leadership team?
Right. Yeah. Good question. Right. And I think like what you said is totally true, because I think a lot of organizations, when they're considering training, they often use it as a Band-Aid to try to fix a problem. Right. They see it, like you said, they see this, oh, so-and-so's not performing, or this department's not performing, or whatever the case is. And it's not like you shouldn't do programming or training or development within that, right? Sure. Like that could be a very good sign that there's a pain point and a need to do something. But I think you need to always look up up the chain, up the triangle, right? To kind of where's the root of the problem. A lot of times it is with leadership. The statistics are pretty clear around that. 70% of the variance in employee engagement is because of the leaders in the organization, not because of the employees in the organization. Lots of people leave their work because of their bosses, not because of their job, right? There's all these different kinds of factors in there. Right. But I think you need to answer that question, and you used that phrase earlier, like answer the why. Like, why do we want to do this training? Why do we want to build our leaders, build our teams, whatever it is? If we can't answer that, then we can't really work the problem, right? We need to work from the why down to the why we're doing the learning and development, and then back up into, again, achieving that why.
Yeah. Right.
I like to talk about it as kind of being, you've got your the business objectives, right? And then you've got your processes that will lead towards those business objectives. But the next, going down the chain is the behaviors. What are the behaviors we need? And then what kind of training can we do? And then that training drives the behaviors, which drives, which leads to the processes being effective. Because if you got processes, the behaviors will be a big factor whether those processes succeed. And then if those processes succeed, they're going to help you achieve your business objectives. So I think if you're a leader in an organization, you need to make sure that that's really clear. What's my why? How does it build back to the training, and how does it go back up?
Makes sense. So there's a couple of ways to approach this. And one way I've been a part of is sort of the very light way, which is basically like a book club for leaders, right? Which is, let's all get Simon Sinek and then sit around and talk about what it meant to us. Or let's get Brene Brown and then let's talk about what that book meant to us. And, about two people in the group actually read the book, and a few others sort of just are waiting for this to be over so they can get back to work. And then, and the leader's confused on why this isn't working. And then there is the big like off-site retreat where I fly everybody to Maui and we spend a weekend bonding and doing leadership exercises and all these different things. Does it depend on the culture, on the way that you should approach this? Does it depend on your budget? Because some of these things can be expensive. Like I mentioned, flying the team to Maui is expensive. But even bringing in coaches sometimes can be pricey.
Right.
what should be my determination on how I'm choosing a leadership development
Right.
program?
Well, I think when you do fly your team to Maui, bring me along to help facilitate. First of all, I'll gladly come along. I'll even give you a discounted rate if you fly me out there with
I like
your
this.
team.
Okay.
Yeah,
It's out
yeah,
there. It's recorded.
I'm on board for that. I think that whatever. Let me take the question away from the methodology and first talk a little bit about why it's important to even step back from that, because
Okay.
in fact, statistically speaking, only about 8% of learning and development initiatives, and this is across every type of learning and development, are currently measuring business impact of those, whatever it is that you're doing. Right. So whether it's the book
Sure.
club kind of thing, or whether it's the retreat, or whether it's anywhere in between, right? Only about 8% are actually measuring that impact that you're trying to achieve. Either way that you do things, the inherent problem with most learning and development, and it relates to something called the Ebbinghaus curve of forgetting. Um, you can just Google Ebbinghaus and see it, but it's basically that, and we all know this, we only remember about 10% of what we've learned within the 7 days of learning it. So we forget 90% of what we learned within 7 days.
Okay.
That's not a very good return on investment if that's what happens, right? Whether it's a book club, whether
Right.
it's the retreat, it's like, hey, this great kind of time. And I always like to say to the clients I work with, inspiration isn't the goal, or you can say information isn't the goal.
Mm.
Transformation is. So whatever we do, we
Yeah.
want to see that transformation. And so, sure, do a book club if you really want. Probably some people aren't going to be engaged with it. Some people might be. But we need to look at everything we're doing in learning and development, especially in leadership development, where leaders are just insanely busy. We don't want to add things in that actually don't make any difference for them. And we want to see how we can help that learning and that translate from learning into actual behavioral change action, right? What's the action that will happen as a result? The industry has tried to help solve this in a couple different ways. One is coaching, and coaching can be excellent, right? There is that. You ask, do we bring in a coach to help with that? It can be excellent, but it can be expensive.
Yep.
Right? Some organizations, it's just not there. I recommend coaching for individuals, especially leaders and senior leaders in an organization, to just, even just navigate normal challenges of being a leader and trying to figure out what to do. So, that is a piece of things that can help improve learning and development. Or the other side is that, and there's been a lot of work around this as well, is the term micro learning. So micro learning, it can be more cost effective than coaching, but that's where it's kind of like you do these kind of drip content, right, of what you're learning. And that can help, but that still has limited effectiveness unless the participant is taking the time still to actually engage with it. They actually find relevance in it. But again, how are they applying it? I think the critical piece of everything is, how do you apply it? That's where coaching can help, right? Because the coach can ask the question,
Sure.
like, how are you going to apply what you've learned? But I think there needs to be even another step beyond that, is to, like, in general, anything you operate from a learning development standpoint in your organization, how can we translate that into actions that are relevant to each individual? That's where leadership development really starts to take that next step. Actioning what we're learning, measuring what we're learning, and then getting insights from what we've learned in order to keep that cycle going. That's where you see growth actually happening that reach business objectives.
Okay. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me, because the business objectives are ultimately my goal, right? Like, I want the team to be more engaged. I want them to be happy. I want them to do a better job. But, the bottom line is the bottom line in a lot of ways, right? So to that point, do you feel that much like in consulting, like with the work that we do, right, in building custom software for folks, a lot of times the people showing up have an idea of what the solution should be, and they're usually wrong. They usually think, well, Ben, I just need you to come in for like a day and talk to some of my folks. Can you do that? What sort of research can I do as a leader when I'm choosing these programs? Because a lot of times, again, as leaders, we're fast moving. A leadership development program is kind of like giving, not a part-time, but like a quarter-time job now to people, right? right? Because they've already got a full-time job. And now what Ben's asking them to take, I don't know, a day, 2 days, something amount of time out of there and turn off their phones and sit and listen, and do these things. It's kind of like giving people an extra job. So how do you approach, or how do you approach when clients come to you and kind of, they have a solution in mind? What's your process to figure out how you should engage with them? I know you have kind of sort of package services, right? You have kind of like off the shelf sort of approach, but I'm sure because you're awesome, you customize for each engagement. Tell me about how that works with you. Like, what's that usual first touch point with the client?
Yeah, and I think that it is very similar to what you shared already, right? Where it's really trying to ask the questions about what they're really wanting. Because I think that there's, especially in the world of leadership development or team development, it's kind of a little bit of a cliche or a trend, right? Like, oh, I need to do this leadership development or this team development, or I heard someone say I should, or like,
right, I need to check a box,
right? Yeah, Simon Sinek says it's good, right?
So Simon Sinek says it's good. My leaders have asked for it, so I need to shut them up. So we'll get somebody in here, we'll do some exercises, write some post-it notes, and we'll be done we'll get back to work.
Yeah, and I can't afford Simon Sinek, so let's find out who else we can have come in, right? And so then they reach out to companies like myself or whatever, and there's lots of people out there that do it.
Yeah.
And I think that for me, when I approach those kind of conversations, I really want to dig into what's the story of the organization, right? Like, what's the root of this? Like, where are you really coming from? Where's the pain points, right? It's always, what's the problem that you have? I mean, as a leadership consultant, that's really what I'm trying to do, right? I'm trying to help them solve the problem. That's maybe negative terminology to put on it, but solve the problem that they have, whether it's those leaders who have been very excellently, on individual performance, right? They're very good technically, or they're very good with the skills. That's why they've been promoted up through the organization, but they've never had any leadership development training, or whether it's the leader who's been doing it for 30 years and just needs that next level of, okay, like I need another, tool. I need another reminder. I need another kind of step up in the impact that I'm having. And I think if there'd be people that are exploring this type of opportunity in their organizations, I think a key question that you need to ask, so this is to all your people tuning in, is you need to ask the people that you're bringing in, the consultants, the facilitators, the coaches, how do you track and measure success towards my business objectives? And if you're not clear what your business objectives are, you probably want to clarify that before you reach out to someone like me. I'll try to draw that out from you, right? Yes. I mean, that's my job, but if you are clear on it, it makes it easier. Absolutely. Right. So I think that's a key question that your listeners will need to ask. How do you track and measure towards those business objectives when you do work like leadership development, which, I have an approach that I use for that actually isn't just like surveys, right? At the end of a session, those don't mean a whole lot.
People love surveys, Ben.
Yeah.
They love them.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how did you enjoy this? Right. Like,
would you refer me?
Right. And I shouldn't say, like, I'm saying it a little bit like, facetiously, that it's bad. It's not bad, right? That can be a piece of tracking it, but that only, again, satisfies those kind of first two levels. Did people enjoy the content? Right. And did they, did they appreciate it, and did they enjoy it, learn it, right? Did they learn anything? Mm-hmm. And that usually is all it measures in those situations. It doesn't actually translate into, well, did you do anything with the content? Will you do anything with the content?
Right.
What will you do with what we learned?
Mm-hmm.
That's, I think, the critical point in anything that you do in your organization around learning and development. You need to be able to have that. What will you do with it? How will we measure how you're doing it? And how does that equal our business objectives?
Yeah. And again, as a facilitator, I'm sure you've got to be careful, right? Because you got a lot of powerful personalities in a room, and the squeaky wheel, right? Is one of the biggest concerns that I've had. Because I've been through, like I said, I've been through multiple rounds of leadership development processes over my 25 years in my career. And, some are, when you leave, you've got one of my peers is saying, well, that pretty much just confirmed that I'm right. Everything that I thought was correct is correct. And I'm just going to walk away with that. And then other people are thinking, well, I didn't really know what I thought about it. And I think exactly to your point, a lot of the issues that came from those is that people weren't measuring those outcomes. Now, I joked earlier about OKRs and tacking those on to those outcomes, but I think there is some very quantifiable things that you can put in place for these leadership. I mean, depending on the scale of that you're putting into these
Yeah.
things too, right? Because if you're spending like a couple hours over a Zoom call, like it's going to be really hard to be like, well, I'm giving you a new yearly goal or something, right?
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
um, talk to me about those different levels of measurement, right? Like you mentioned, there's
Yeah.
surveys, which seem kind of be more at the bottom level. And then there's stuff that's maybe all the way attached to your compensation or
Yeah.
something of that nature, right?
Right. Yeah, and I think that those can both play a role. I think
Mm-hmm.
a lot of times what gets missed is what happens in between there. Right? How do we identify? So let's use the compensation as an example, right? So
Yeah.
hey, like your compensation is going to be X as long as you meet these three things or 10 things or whatever that it is. But I think that the key thing is still pulling that back and saying, well, what behaviors will lead towards those, and can we actually measure those behaviors? And if we can measure those behaviors and see where things are going, it's going to actually help us know whether you're actually going to get to those metrics at the end of it all. But also, it's going to help us to recognize that that if we're tracking those behaviors and getting insights from those behaviors, it's going to provide a lot of those kind of coaching conversations we want with our people and with our leaders. So let me share a little bit practically what this could look like, or at least the approach that I take, and this can be replicated in different ways. I use some tools that help support it, but when I'm working with leaders, I kind of use content, context, action, and insight as the kind of the four steps or four pieces of it. It's not really steps; they kind of all interact in some way, but content is usually a good starting point, right? So if we're going to do any kind of learning side of things, what's the content that we're delivering?
Mm-hmm.
Let's make sure it's delivered well. Let's do it in smaller chunks of time. It can work in a bigger context, like, hey, we're going to do an 8-hour retreat of some sort. It can work, but I usually recommend doing it in smaller chunks of time because people don't remember everything, right? We have a capacity of how much we remember. So it kind of integrates a little bit of that micro learning side of things a little bit. But the content, as the content is a part of what you're doing, how does it lead towards application? Right? That's the piece that leads towards the next, which is context.
Right.
Right. In context, we have to answer the questions like what, so what, and now what. Right. So what did we learn? So what? Why was that important? Now what are we going to do with it? And context is important because those two leaders you were talking about, the one that was like, oh, I know everything, and the other one was, like, oh, I'm not really sure if this applied at all, and someone was probably saying, oh, this was gold, right? I love this. This was like perfect what I needed. They all have different contexts, whether that's based on experience, job title, team size, roles, like all those different kind of things. So for each of them, the so what and the now what could be different, or
Mm-hmm.
probably are different. After the context piece of things, then what I do is the action side of it. And I walk leaders through a commitment. They create an actual commitment, an action commitment that they're going to do based on what they've learned, right? So it's the now what. So what commitment are you going to make?
Yeah.
And then I use this nudge-based technology. I use technology to help support it, but you can set this up as a just calendar reminder. It's not quite as effective as the techniques that I use, but it can work to just have this reminder in your calendar. This is the action I committed to. Have that reminder show up like every day, right? As to how it's going to go. How are you doing on the action that you've committed to? Ideally, you'd like it to be a place where you can also kind of check in and track how you're doing. Oh, I did great today on this action, or I did poor today on this action, or like Bob really messed me up today. I couldn't do what I wanted to do because he's terrible. So my action got in the way. And then that drives insight at the end, the fourth piece, right? The insight. It allows the program designers, it allows the people that are kind of trying to develop their group to
Right.
get feedback. That's where it's like, hey, well, what was the biggest learning that you had from this? What were some of the struggles, the things that got in your way? When you had a bad day, why did you have a bad day? And you capture all of that in a way that allows you to then reiterate the whole process and say, hey, okay, now let's go back to content and keep reinforcing it. Of course, all of this goes back to the why. So why are we doing this? And that points towards those competencies, those business outcomes, those potentially the compensation discussion that you want to be able to pull it back to when you're working with your leaders.
Yeah. And I think to your point, if I can track those things, I can go back and see what the root cause is. I can see, is it just this person is a bad fit? And,
Yeah.
maybe they were great 2 years ago. Now
Right.
where we're at, they're not great. I can make a decision from that. Or
Yeah.
it can point out that some of our policies and procedures and the way that we're shaped as an organization
Right.
is causing those things. Without those measurement tools, it's a lot of it seems is very anecdotal and in the moment when
Yeah.
you're making those decisions, right, Ben?
Yeah. Well, if you could, that's where data becomes really powerful, right? The data of being able to see that and being able to see, okay, so for, let's say you're working with a team of leaders, let's say just a group of 8 for hypothetical reasons, and 7 of them on whatever the action is that they were committing to, 7 of them had success driving change, growth. You're able to see that data, that progress, see those metrics, see some of that feedback, and then there's the one who didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Now, it could just be that they, didn't believe in the process or whatever. So there could be some things there. But what it does is it allows you to have clearer conversations around why.
Right.
Okay. So, hey, I noticed you didn't do this. Like, I noticed this wasn't something for you. I noticed you struggled with this, or you weren't checking in. Why not? And then you can coach them through it, or potentially that's when you let them go, right?
Right.
But at least you have some actual metrics and some conversations that you can try. Because a lot of times I work with leaders who are like, I don't even know what to talk about with this person. Like they're
Right.
bad at what they do, but like, or I think they're bad at what they do, but I don't know. Like, are
Right.
they?
I
maybe
don't know.
maybe I just don't know. Yeah.
Right. And that's a problem a lot of leaders have because again, back to your point about metrics, is that they gather lots of data in organizations, but they don't really use data to make decisions as much as they should. And
Yeah.
because they haven't really made that process from A to B very clear about, well, I've gathered this data, I've gathered this report on the actionable things that they are doing that's impacting the business. And
Yeah.
then for some reason, it's hard to translate into some sort of line which says above this, you're doing great, and below this,
Right.
you're not doing great. And so when it comes to the work that you're doing, Ben, like I think, you're not necessarily coming in and saying, well, I'm going to teach you how to do sales better, sales leaders.
Mhm.
You're talking about stuff that can be a bit more amorphous, a bit more, because sometimes it is more EQ, right? It is
Yeah.
more emotional intelligence. And that's when it's even more important to put some numbers around these things because you can just tell somebody, well, you're not a good culture fit and that's
Yeah.
why this isn't working. You
Yeah.
can, as a leader, you absolutely have the right to do that.
Sure.
But is that going to make you feel good, right? That you made the right decision
Right.
by having those metrics to say, well, this in this role, this is what the culture fit means.
Yeah.
It's partly, yes, it's partly sort of ethereal, but the other part is these metrics that we've put together that make it very clear that you're not
Yeah.
performing the way you should be.
Yeah. I think, and that ties in with the behaviors, right? So like,
Yeah.
because if you like, and that's the big thing with when I talk about culture with organizations, having your core values or whatever, that's all great, right? Have that all defined, and I love when organizations have that defined. But if they haven't been able to add to that piece, what does this culture look like from a behavioral
Mm-hmm.
standpoint, right? Like for this culture value to be true, or for this to be true, how do we behave?
Right.
And if we can put the words around that, then that allows something like this to be put into a, hey, we're going to actually go through this now with a internally or externally, bring in Ben or whoever to walk us through what these behaviors mean. We're going to identify specific actions that we can all take towards these behaviors, which will build our culture, and we're going to measure that success. And then you can see at the end of it all, well, I guess people can still fake it, right? They can still lie and say, oh yeah, I did it excellent.
Yep.
I did this behavior every day. I did this behavior, but ultimately you hope that it actually translates into people being honest with it. That if they're not being honest, then they're obviously a bad culture fit almost anywhere. I haven't found a place that says dishonesty is a culture that we're trying to achieve. But then you can identify those behaviors, turn them into actions,
The
and measure
mafia,
that.
right?
Yeah, mafia. That might be the only place where that's part of their values.
Yeah. Well, okay. So last question here, and I think this is the one that's most important to me to get your perspective on, Ben, is that because I've been through this before, what I've seen is that let's take any company that's growing up, or even that's grown up. It doesn't really matter. You've
Sure.
got delivery, production, whatever you want to call it. You've got sales and marketing. You've got HR. You've got financials. You've got product. All these different things, and each of these groups have separate metrics, right? So sales doesn't have the same metrics that product
Right.
does, and product doesn't have the same metrics that sales does, right? Sales needs to get things through the door at whatever the cost. Hit your number, hit your number.
Yeah.
And the product team needs to make sure that customers are happy and that they retain people, and delivery and production need to make sure they're shipping and so on and so forth, right? All
Right.
these people have different goals. So when you get them all in a room and you're like, okay, we need you all to work as a team,
Hmm.
some leaders are really shocked when they see that their vice president of sales and vice president of product don't see eye to eye.
Right.
And they're shocked and they're like, but we're all, and I love this analogy, like we're all supposed to be swimming the same direction.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
like, yeah, but your goals and your compensation are they're at odds
Yeah.
with each
Yeah.
other in these places. Your job is to close whatever deals, no matter what, which
Yeah.
means you'll tell the customer that the product does stuff that maybe it doesn't quite do
And
right
it's ready
now.
tomorrow. And it's ready tomorrow. Yeah.
Yeah, and then the product team is like they're shifting priorities because of maybe supply chain issues or technology issues. And so their product roadmap changes. So whatever they told sales was coming now is probably changed. And they're confused at why. Anyways, I could go on for days about this. So my point being, Ben, is that when you get these, I'm guessing that you're not getting just a group of leaders in a room that are just all the marketing executives, that it
Right.
is from people from different departments. How important is common goals across these leaders? How important is
Yeah.
it that they have goals that are dependent on each other, or not or even just they're the exact same? Because my worry is that if you do a leadership development program and you create individual metrics for marketing in leadership and sales in leadership, you just kind of keep
Right.
creating the same problem that has you in the room in the first place.
Right. Yeah. And so couple things came to mind as you're asking that question. First of all, it's a great question because that is a very common scenario in a lot of organizations that get to a certain point where it's silos, right? Where you start having these silos,
Yep.
they operate independently in these silos. They all have their own targets, goals, etc. They feel like none of the other silos matter, or maybe they don't feel like any of the other silos matter, but they feel like none of the other silos think they matter.
Yeah. They're not as important as my
Right,
silo. That's for sure.
right,
Like I'm
right,
sure
exactly.
they're important, but they're not. Like I am.
Yeah,
The company
yes,
relies on me, sir.
and exactly, and they feel that tension because their silo is not getting the attention it deserves, right?
Right.
All like so, yeah. It's a pretty common challenge, and I think let me back up to something I said a little bit earlier, first of all, and then I'm going to flesh it out a little bit differently. I think that's why that big why is so important. So why are we having this leadership development happening, right? Why are we doing this team development? And it can't just be because we want you to succeed individually in your silo or individually in your piece of that silo. It has to all point back to what is the organizational objectives. Now, I sometimes work with intact teams, right? So I sometimes work with a silo, for lack of a better term. I don't like that term. I don't think that
I
we
know.
should have, perfect silos. There is going to be a natural kind of, hey, like this is my
Sure.
realm, but I feel like it should be less silo-y. Sometimes I do work with intact teams, and then we do talk about, okay, like for your intact team, what's the why for your team? So it might be sales in that case, right? Like what's the behaviors, what's the actions, what's the metrics we want to make sure we're shooting towards in sales. But if you're pulling the whole organization together, that big why needs to be really clear. And that starts from the top down. It all flows downhill, right? So the leadership,
It does.
whether it's the key leader or the leadership team, whatever the group is at the top there, they really need to be working together And when there's that conflict between those departments, there's going to always be that tension, but it points back to what Patrick Lencioni talks about in his 5 behaviors of an effective team, or the 5 dysfunctions of a team, if you go back to his book, as to do they have a solid trust together?
Yep.
And most of the time in those situations, when there is conflict that isn't good conflict, because conflict isn't always bad, when there isn't good conflict, it's because there isn't trust between sales and development, right? Or marketing and shipping, right? Or whatever the case is. There's not trust that they're trying to achieve great things together. So it needs to pull back there. That leadership team, if they're siloing in your organization, and sometimes the key leader, if you're listening to this and you're a key leader, you may not even see that. You may not even notice it. It usually shows up in ways that you think, oh, that's just good conflict. Sometimes it is good conflict. Sometimes it's just because it's dysfunctional.
Right.
You need to really say, hey, we're going to build trust here, and we're trying to, build a way that we can work together. And if it's broken, you need to navigate that carefully. Bring in someone from the outside to help navigate that with you. Like really an outside person can be super helpful in that. I'm not just trying to upsell some of the stuff I do.
It's really important. You need that outside perspective. You need people.
Yeah.
You need people that are not in the whirlwind like you. You need people outside of it that can see what's going on in the rest of the world, not just what's happening in the spinning tornado that is your business at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's where I would recommend that happen. If you have a very broken organization at the top, bringing someone in like me to help with team development may not be super effective. It's not like it's going to be zero impact. Right? I mean, I like to think that I'm pretty effective at what I do, and there's lots of really great facilitators and team developers out there that can really, turn, something pretty bad into something better. But really, it all starts at the top. So that's where you need to really make sure your team is functioning well. And if it's not, good luck.
Yeah, good luck. Yeah, if those things are broken, I mean, don't expect just bringing in outside people just to fix those sorts of things. I mean, they can help you identify what needs to be fixed, but again, what we're talking about here, Ben, right, is transformation, not a fix, right? So a fix means there's an endpoint where, okay, I have Ben come in, he, a few whiteboards and we're done and everything's fixed. And then I can just go about my business. But transformation is an ongoing process. It's something that's going to take time, because over the years, you're going to have new leaders come in and these sorts of things. So the other benefit I see to having someone like yourself come in is that, again, teach a person to fish, right? Is that I can learn some of the things that Ben is doing internally and create that as part of my own internal leadership development program, and use those things and bring in Ben when I need the heavy hitting, and I can have HR help lead some of these other sessions. The work that Ben's doing can add to our employee handbook, to our policies, to all those things. So to me, it's not just about Ben comes in like in his cape and swoops down, is like, what's all this then? It is something where you could take a lot away for the entirety of your organization, because again, how much does it cost to replace those leaders that that are going to get that are not experiencing leadership development in a positive way?
I actually have a number for that, Kurt. I know the studies have said actually it's 6 to 9 months of salary is what they estimate.
I believe it.
To replace someone. Yeah.
I believe it. So, I've been there. I've had to do it. It's not a fun place to be. But again, I understand sometimes companies outgrow employees. Sometimes employees outgrow companies. It's perfectly natural. But that doesn't mean that we just sit by and wait and we don't sandbag when we see the water rising, right? It's time to get out, the galoshes. I don't know why I'm going with this analogy, but I'm here. Everybody, join me. If the floodwaters are rising, you can just kind of watch it wash over you, or you can do something about it. And so, Ben, like I said, I'm so impressed with the work you do, and I'm so glad that you have joined me today. If I want to know more about the work that you do, Ben, and if I want to learn more about how I can work with you, where's a good place to go? Where do I find Ben? Where is he?
Yeah, I think there's 2 places you can look. You can find my website and Kurt has a screenshot of it there, CanteraLeadership.com. It does need a little bit of updating. I need to put some work around it, but it'll give you a pretty good framework of some of the work that I do. You can also find me, probably even a better place to find me is on LinkedIn. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Ben Dueck, and you can find me there. I will say as well, for anyone listening, I'm going to give an offer, a freebie away here, Kurt. So I didn't tell you I was going to offer this. So freebies to your listeners. The first 10 people who reach out to me for a conversation about kind of the stuff they're doing for team and leadership development in an organization are going to get a free Clifton Strengths assessment for whoever it is that reaches out to me. So a free assessment. It's a tool I use. I find it super valuable for working with leaders and teams. And I'll give to the first 10 people to get in touch with me a free assessment so you can find out your top 5 talents and how they help you be a successful leader.
That's awesome, Ben. Ben, thank you so much. I always enjoy when you come on the show. So we got to do it again sometime soon. So I appreciate you taking the time. And yeah, everybody who's listening out there, make sure you reach out and talk to Ben. Thanks, Ben.
Thanks for having me on, Kurt. It was so good to talk again. I always love it. Have me back whenever you can.
I will. Thank you, Ben. All right, everyone. Thank you for taking the time today. I really appreciate you and the time and the effort that you put in to join me. If you have questions, comments, make sure you subscribe. You see the little animation there? I made, by the way, made that myself. Yep, I did. So check us out at foundrymakes.com. You can check out schmidtlist.com. You can just go to the Googles, search for all that stuff. Follow, like, subscribe, smash buttons, do all the things that the kids say. And we will see you next.